you're trying to cross a river, to have one foot in one boat and another foot in another boat. Because invariably there'll be mistakes. As we heard, the destination of heaven is without mistakes. He made a mistake. It was an unintentional mistake. He speaks of himself later when Krishna delivered him from being a lizard. Who are you? How'd you get in this lizard body? Because he showed the form of a demigod. Like, how did this happen? And he tells his story. He was King Nrga, the son of ISKCON. Interestingly, in the 9th canto it says he was a brother. In the 10th canto it says he was the son, because of different days of Brahma, different relationships with ISKCON. But he was a son of ISKCON. And the numbers of cows and gold and valuable things, etc., 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 that he would give away on a daily basis to brahmanas and qualified persons was like unimaginable, not possible in our modern time. So he lived in a previous yuga, even previous to Dwapara Yuga, because that's when ISKCON came to be in Ayodhya. In any case, the mistake was one of the cows that he gave in charity to a brahmana wandered back into the herd of cows. And he gave the same cow to a second brahmana. And the second brahmana, when taking the cow to his home, was approached by the first brahmana who said, "Wait a minute, that's my cow." He said, "No, no, no. The king just gave me this cow." He said, "I'm telling you, it's my cow. Let's go to the king to settle it." The king then understood what had happened. He volunteered, pleaded, "Please forgive me, unintentional mistake. Please forgive me. Take 100,000 cows in exchange for this one cow." No. They weren't very elevated brahmanas. To excuse the king, they were attached brahmanas. So they left in a huff. Now some versions say because of the offense of taking the property of a brahmana, some versions say the brahmanas cursed him. But at the end of his King Nrga life, he had to go pay a visit to, you know who, Yamaraj. And Yamaraj was appreciating his lifetime of great pious activities. So he gave him a choice. We don't normally hear about Yamaraj giving people choices, but he gave him a choice. And he selected, "I'll take the responsibility for my past mistake first, and then I'll enjoy the fruits of my pious activities." But meanwhile, this other part of him was he's a Krishna Bhakta. He's mixed. Karma Mishra Bhakti. Bhakta. So Yamaraj said, "So be it." He became a lizard. And in a previous yuga, so he became a really big lizard living in the bottom of a well. The sons of Krishna, when in the forest, became thirsty. They looked for water. They found a well. Instead of water in the well, they found a giant lizard. They tried to lift, out of compassion, lift the giant lizard out of the well. They couldn't do it. They went to Krishna. Krishna did it. He extended his arm like an elastic arm and lifted the body, just touched the body of the lizard, and a demigod came out of the, not King Nrga, but a demigod described as being decorated as demigods are decorated, with a crown and ornaments and celestial garments, etc. He told this story, and it was now, according to what Yamaraj had said, it was now time for him to enjoy the fruits of his pious activities, which are enormous. So a Vimana descended, that's just like is described here, and off he went. And as he was being lifted by the celestial Vimana, Krishna said, when you finish the results of your pious activities, you will then come to me. Now that's not normal, that one would, you just a karma mishra bhakti, you go to the heavenly planets and make a quick stopover and then you go to Krishna Loka. A very fortunate personality. But the stipulation in the verses we just read is faultless. Now, who's faultless? Is there such a thing as a faultless person? Living entities are, conditioned living entities are prone to make mistakes, along with the other three defects of a conditioned soul. So who's going to go to the heavenly planets on the precondition that you have to faultlessly execute all these rituals? Not so likely. And then, consistent with so many teachings found in the Bhagavatam, whatever the attainments achieved, they're temporary. It may look fantastic, very inviting, an upgrade to the something realm, and temporary. And same as Bhagavad Gita. Shine punya marcha lokam vashanti, one comes back again. And the Ferris wheel going up, down, the whole process of striving for greater happiness through fruitive activities, theistic or atheistic. In modern times it's mainly atheistic, but there are some theistic people that also want to attain heaven. It's very clear in the Vedas, certainly in the Bhagavatam, it's temporary. So who would aspire for something temporary, knowing that later on come back again? And when that coming back again has become attached to a standard of happiness that's superlative, to this so-called happiness, that's also so-called happiness, not only because it's temporary, dukkhalayam ashashvatam. It's actually that the greatest maha dukkha is forgetting one's relationship with Krishna. So the heavenly realm is not a place where people are busily engaged in remembering Krishna. They're busily engaged in accessing the opulence in the mood of enjoyment. It's like going to Hawaii, or going to Goa, or going to a place, going to Disneyland. People don't go there to remember Krishna. And when they're done, they come back to their fruitive activities. But while there, it's enjoy as much as one can. Commonly, the heavenly planets are that kind of a place. People there are certainly pious. To get to that realm, it's certainly a condition of piety. And as we're hearing, the Gandharvas, when one goes there, one is welcomed. It's like, big, hey, you made it. come on in. And a welcoming ceremony. I've been spending some time reading this purport. It made me think of I've been spending some time for the purpose of the Chinese national holiday, which comes the first week in October every year by solar calendar, to go through the entire light of the Bhagavad, verse by verse. And those of you, that are disciples of Tamal Krishna Maharaj, you certainly know who published it. Although Prabhupada wrote it, it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj who published it 20 years after it was written, because it was never published. Including commissioning a somewhat noted, if not celebrated, artist from China in making the art drawings. In any case, one of the verses one of the verses describes at the end of the rainy season, everything is flourishing. However, persons who are too much attached, the householders specifically described, too much attached, are like cranes. And cranes are at the edge of the lake at the end of the rainy season, and they're very attached, although they have many inconveniences. So in the commentary, 3-paragraph commentary that Prabhupada wrote on this verse, he writes that saintly people, they sacrifice everything to help the attached householders understand the misfortune that they are finding themselves in and bestow transcendental knowledge. The transcendental knowledge is compared to the rain during rainy season that puts out the misery, or puts out the forest fire of material existence for those who are attached. And when those who are saintly people do like this, sometimes they're welcomed and sometimes they're not welcomed, but they do it anyways, because their interest is relieving people, on the one hand, relieving people from unnecessary suffering and trouble, and second is lifting them to the position of real happiness. So this is the verse we read yesterday evening from the beginning part of Kapila Dev's teachings on devotional service. This is the Vedic process. The Vedic process provides a means for those who are in ignorance, who don't have any transcendental knowledge, and are not experiencing real happiness because its actual senses and sense objects is dukkha, although it is perceived as sukha because of the mode of ignorance. Like drinking alcohol is perceived by some as sukha, or whatever are the other things that are in the mode of ignorance, happiness is. But the method is lifting people from those lower rungs through the process of the Vedas to passion, then goodness, in goodness realizing knowledge, and then having knowledge of transcendence, knowledge of Krishna. That's the whole Vedic process. And consistent in what's being presented here is some persons turn their back. In different categories, different persons turn their back on transcendence, on Krishna. And thus, when you turn your back on light, what's in front of you? Shadow. I like how Prabhupada made things so simple. When you're facing the sunlight, what do you see? You see light. When you turn your back to the sunlight, what do you see? Shadow. And then he adds, and there's not two things. There's light and there's shadow, and there's not a third thing. Now there's stages in between. That's the modes of nature, stages in between. But what Krishna is doing here, in his talks with Uddhava, the title of the chapter is The Nature of Fruitive Activity, and whether it's pious or impious. Whether it's pious or impious, it leads to that which is temporary and full of misery. Ashashvatam. Dukkalayam ashashvatam. Limited happiness that's actually sukha, dukkha, and is temporary. So one should not, the advice is don't go for it. Don't go for the temporary. If you don't go for the temporary, what do? Well, you have different philosophies. But the Vaishnava philosophy, rather than listing the so many other philosophies, and it is purport that I just was on the way over here to Houston. That was the verse I was reading and preparing, making PowerPoints for the Chinese devotees. There's so many. In this age of Kali, the proliferation of alternative ideologies that are deliberately or unintentionally, they're replacing the Vedas. So, in other words, deliberately or unintentionally, intentionally or unintentionally, Krishna is obscured. And the more Krishna is obscured, then you have varieties of fruitive activities or frustration, and then seeking something that's not possible to achieve. Happiness in the material world is not possible to achieve. That which goes under the label of happiness is distress by design and certified by the designer. Dukkalayam ashashvatam. Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate. That's the product. The material world generates dukkha for those who want sukha, whether it's pious or impious. Like the classic wet stool, dry stool, which is better? The upside or the downside of stool. This is better. Stool is stool. The forgetfulness of Krishna is not the standard of happiness. So, in this whole chapter, the nature of fruitive activity, Krishna is painting a very graphic picture of whether pious or impious. What's the result? Not a desired result. Now, those who are unintelligent, they'll keep doing the same thing again and again anyways. And those, by hearing the nature of the foolishness of fruitive activity, pious or impious, may put the brakes on and turn in a different direction. But that turning in a different direction is hard to maintain unless one has shelter of transcendence. So it's helpful, but it's insufficient. Knowledge alone is insufficient. Bhakti alone is sufficient. Bhakti is independent, so that there's of course in Uddhava's, Krishna's talks with Uddhava, there's a whole focus on devotional service. But there's also, like in this chapter and so many other places in the Bhagavatam, very, very clear description of the limitations of elevation through fruitive activities. The necessity of coming to the stage of real knowledge, and in the stage of real knowledge, applying that knowledge towards the object, the personality of Godhead in His service. So that's, and then realization of the Supreme Person and ourselves, our relationship with Him. We heard this yesterday, so I'll say it again. Kardama Muni requested permission from his son to retire from family life. Now, the father requesting the son is a little different than the normal social dynamic, but he understood that Kapila Dev wasn't just his son. He understood Kapila Dev was the personality of Godhead. To go to the forest and renew his practice that he was doing prior to Kapila Dev becoming his son. And to set an example, this is one of the explanations of why he would leave Kapila Dev to meditate upon the personality of Godhead when he has the personality of Godhead as his son. Doesn't need to go anywhere, do anything. Shri Shri Radha Nilamadava Ki Jai. But I'm making this reference specifically that as Kapila Dev gave his blessing, Kardama, when he went to the forest, he lived alone. He did the same things that he was doing before, lived very austerely, and engaged in fixing his mind, madgatein antaratmana, on the Supreme Lord within his heart. He came to experience pandita samadarshana, that all living entities are the shelter place of the super soul. And then it says, he saw the Supreme Lord everywhere, and he saw himself. Now, it doesn't elaborate seeing himself means what, but he saw himself, which is something very similar to what our acharyas say is the fruit of bhakti practice. One can understand, not only understand notionally, but one can see the Supreme Lord, and one can see oneself and the relationship. That's our process, and that's, so there's substantial teaching about staying away from the misconception of trying to become an enjoyer of this world through fruitive activities. Although the Vedas have that arrangement. When all necessities can be provided, not even necessities, just desires, by the codes of the Vedas, by the Karma Kanda rituals. And it's Vedic. And it elevates, and it brings one to the position in that elevated state of goodness where there's more detachment than what we heard in the previous verses about those who become elevated to heavenly planets and become enjoyers. But there's detachment, the potential of detachment, and in that potential of detachment, the awakening of knowledge. But for our process, the awakening of knowledge and detachment they're both a byproduct of bhakti. So that's the real message, the real advocacy of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Consistent. Let's see if there's some discussion. Yes. Oh, there it is. There's two. Got a twin. I don't know which one's good. They both work.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I have a question. I haven't understood well how does it work.
Speak slowly, please.
Yes.
I'm hard of hearing.
Yes, sorry. I have a question. So, in one of the verses we've read, it is said that one may go to the heavenly planets, enjoying the fruit of his pious activity, and when it terminates, it will go back to the material world, right?
He'll come to this earthly realm, because the heavenly planets are also material.
Right, he will come to this
Earthly realm.
Earthly realm. So I wonder, they've done some pious activity before, going to the heavenly planets, and so they have some sort of state of mind which was pious. When they come back, where do they start from?
Where do they start from?
From
Depends.
It's random.
There's not a rule. There's not a pigeonhole. This is the box they fit in. All things are dependent upon two things: guna and karma. So the behaviors, that's the karma, and the modes, the guna, in the heavenly realm is going to determine the next body. The next situation is ruled by guna and karma. So they'll come back to this earthly realm depending on guna and karma.
Similarly, if one commits sinful activities and go to hell,
yes,
and when it finishes, is a similar situation? It depends when you come back to
yeah. Guna and karma, same rule. There was one other thing I wanted to comment on. The way that this is written is, in the hellish planets one also receives a body. I'll see if I can find it. Yes, it's right in the verse. Worshipping ghosts and spirits, the bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body, infected by the darkest modes of nature. My understanding prior to reading this was the experience in the hellish planets is without a gross material body. It's the subtle body experiences life in the hellish planets, as if one has a gross body, but there is no gross body because it's just subtle bodies. That's been my understanding. So I'm going to see if I can get some clarity from scholarly devotees. Does anybody here have an understanding of that distinction? Is there a gross body, a mode of ignorance gross body in the hellish planets, A? Or B? Is the experience as if one has a gross body, but it's just subtle, like in a dream. There's no gross body, it's just that the subtle body is zooming around doing stuff. And it experiences as if it's the one is embodied. Anybody have an answer? No. Huh? Subtle body also. Okay. So you have your microphone?
Struck me, and also has been kind of coming up in classes lately, how where there's like a seemingly reversal situation, like this situation with King Nrga, where he didn't really do anything purposely wrong. I mean, he made a very honest
Nrga?
mistake. Yeah, like you know,
Correct.
the cows wandered away. It was
Correct.
just like something so
And
innocent.
pretty severe, huh?
Yeah, and then he was trying to repair.
Apologize
Yeah.
with folded palms. Please forgive me. Please accept 100,000 cows of equal quality. And we did all the good stuff.
Yeah. So then the interesting thing is that he becomes a lizard, but then he goes and enjoys and goes straight back to Godhead.
He didn't go straight back to Godhead. He went to the heavenly realm.
So these things that sometimes, I'm sure he wasn't happy being cursed, but then everything good happened after that. So.
Yeah, so the principle, besides this is a pastime of Krishna for teaching something, the principle is even unintentional, what happens after King Nrga goes to the heavenly planets and everyone says Hari Bol, Krishna goes back to Dwarka and he instructs his sons in the presence of others. The taking of a property of a brahmana is very serious business. Don't ever, ever, ever take the property of a brahmana because it's serious business. Be respectful of the property of brahmanas. So the lesson from the Bhagavatam is even unintentional, what to speak of. So it's more culpable, intentional, but even unintentional is culpable. And one might think, well, he was a devotee of sorts. And I thought if you're a devotee, then reactions to past sins, what to speak of, carrying the fruits of your pious activities, you're absolved from just by devotional service. And not only devotional service, but he was touched by Krishna. So why wasn't he relieved of both? At least, the fruits of the pious activities. And there's not a clear explanation other than, I'll give another example, but other than he had very deep impression. Like Dhruva wanted a kingdom big time, but he underwent great austerities, fixing his mind on the personality of Godhead. That's not what King Nrga did. King Nrga was fixing his mind on getting to the heavenly planets. It was a vasana, a deep impression that wasn't taken away by strong devotional service. So Krishna blessed him, you come to me after the enjoyment, but that desire was still there, and that desire was fulfilled. Even though he may have, by being touched by Krishna, etc., having that desire mitigated. And it's something like, not the same, but something like what happened with Dhruva, where for 36,000 years he ruled. And he was feeling really badly. How dumb. If I had desired just the association of Vishnu, I could have gone with him. 36,000 years on the rock pile, breaking rocks, being a king. Another example, of course it doesn't give the detail, but Muchukunda, when he was, here's a detail, it's a nice detail. Muchukunda was told in association with Garga Muni that he would one day see the Supreme Lord. Hearing that from Garga Muni, he believed it. So in his mind, he was wishing to be in the association and see the Supreme Lord. When it finally happened, he couldn't recognize him. But when Krishna disclosed who he was, he lamented like anything over his affinity for being a king and the worldly things that his life was involved with, etc., 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 etc. Now, what happened to him after that? Krishna said, go to the north country, engage in meditation upon me, the Ashtanga yoga process to go up in the Himalayas and do that. And for purification, and because, the commentary explains, he says, during your life as a king, you killed many animals, and so you have to take birth again for having killed many animals. Now, the understanding I have is Krishna had some other service for him. And after living in their next life as an elevated Vaishnava, then you'll come back to me. So my guess doesn't say in the Acharya's commentaries, but Krishna had some service for him. He saw what the future service was, and he gave him the opportunity for that future service to assist him in some way. So the destination of King Nrga, or the destination of someone that has very, very strong affinity for piety, or even for that matter impiety, it doesn't go away so easily. The reactions may go away. The affinity doesn't so easily go away. And he had a strong affinity. And it didn't go away immediately. So the destination of the living entity is in the hands of Krishna. Daivanetrena, one's work, karmana, daivanetrena, and one's modes of nature. Just like when you fall down, where do you go? Guna and karma, decided by the Supreme Lord. So you're back to your question, why King Nrga didn't right away go into the spiritual world. It doesn't say that he had become free from that desire for heavenly enjoyment, and apparently he was still desiring heavenly enjoyment, because when he came out of the body of the lizard, he was in a heavenly body. He was awarded a body according to his desire. And the Vimana descended to fulfill that desire. Off he went, just like we heard in these earlier verses. He had a very strong affinity for that. Although he's in the family of ISKCON, so he also had devotional inclination, but pretty strong material enjoyment inclination. So what's the consequence for those that do pious activities? And the destination is those that have the results of pious activities. Unless you've made some mistakes. And who hasn't made some mistakes? Something else? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.